Adam took a long, deep breath. It was time. This hadn't been his plan, but what he had to do. Pushing the door open, he stepped into the room. It was already full, and every eye turned to face him. A feeling of dread washed over him. The walk to the front of the room was amongst the longest of his life. Every step reverberated through the room. At the front, he turned and began his first lesson. Welcome to Mythical Phylogeny Adventures. I'm your guide, Jason. Today, let's look at a common trope we see in everything from high fantasy to urban fantasy: the magical school. We have all seen it. Doesn't matter if it's a book, a show, or a game. There is a magical school. Probably the most well-known is Hogwarts from Harry Potter. And that does make sense. I mean, we have schools in our world. And I bet all of you have gone through the system. So, they could easily exist in a fantasy world too. That isn't even a question. But how practical are they? And how would they really work? First period is history. Schools are old. They started appearing around 2000 BC. First appearing in Egypt, India, and China. Now, these schools weren't the same as what we have. Most early schools were private institutions that served the upper class. Most lessons back then focused on history, the arts, proper behavior in society, statesmanship, and networking with others of the same class. Skills and abilities which served them. The lower class rarely received much education. They were homeschooled. Now, we have all heard the claim that most people in the medieval era were illiterate. And that isn't true. They could read. But to be considered illiterate, you had to be able to read, write, and speak in Latin, and then French. And we even have books that were common amongst the lower class. Mostly cookbooks, but a few books of poems. Yes, they were expensive back then, but so is a television, a computer, or a gaming system in the modern era. Same thing in concept. There was another issue with schools. Until the Industrial Revolution, most people lived in rural areas. Small populations that are far-flung, and most people were farmers. Their children helped on the farm, and that came before schooling. Even once public schooling took off, farmers' kids often missed school during critical times, such as harvest or calving season. When homeschooling wasn't practiced, you would sometimes see a community school, or have it taken over by the clergy. And those are all issues that a fantasy school system would have to deal with. In a fantasy world, the language of scholars probably isn't the common tongue. Most likely, it would be that of a long-lived species, like elves, which could create issues with who would attend, notwithstanding the politics of the world factoring in. Oh, and that brings back the issues with upper class versus rural areas. The first magical schools probably cater to the upper echelons of society. Yeah, there are a lot of issues with early classism here, but we need to look at how magic works in a world. Traditionally, the words sorcerer and wizard are used interchangeably, but in Dungeons & Dragons, they have different meanings. Wizards learn and study how to perform magic, but the sorcerer is born with magical potential, and this is important. You would need the luxury to study spells. So, attending an academy would be critical, but for the sorcerer, it is about control. In theory, they could learn it alone, but having a magical school would reduce the risk of them blowing themselves and those around them to smithereens. So, if magic is rare and sorcerers spawn with it, if you are discovered to have magical potential, that could create a lot of political issues. with even a hint of it, you could get drafted into the army and sent to the school to learn magic. Now, each type of spellcaster would need different types of classes, so either the same school or their own. Part of what kept the lower class out of school was how much time they spent working the fields and the distance to the school. And magic changes both of these. Having magic which grows the crops, waters them, harvests, and weeds the fields, well, with those sorts of magic, farm work could be much easier, which could allow more people to attend school. But how to get them there? 3 big options. The overpowered teleportation magic, cutting the commute time to seconds, changes everything. But without that, there are 2 more. Boring flight magic. Hop on a broomstick and cross the country. This will depend on the flight speed, but a possibility. And lastly, online learning. Communication mirrors and spells that would remove the constraints of classrooms. Conceptually, these spells could function the same way as the Industrial Revolution was in our world. Overall, a magical school would have many of the same issues which have plagued our world's education, for both the good and the bad. How many of you caught the double meaning of schools here? Often in fancy series, magic is divided into schools or domains, and in magical schools, that means classes. Generally, we have schools like divination, evocation, transmutation, necromancy, and so on. Would a magical school have a class for each? Or is it just books and self-teaching for some? Does it even make sense to divide schools of magic up? Well, isn't science divided up? Let's see, we have physics, chemistry, biology, astronomy, and more. And then they are divided up. Biology has microbiology, marine biology, limnology, ecology, and so forth. So yes, it does make perfect sense to split the schools of magic up. They would talk about how the spells work, how to cast it, and how to counter it. This can make them easier to break down and target the subtle differences of each type of spell. But it would be impossible to talk about schools of magic without going to the forbidden arts. For many series, that would include necromancy, or the unforgivable curses. Now, I'll do a video shortly about whether necromancy is good, evil, or neutral. But right now, how would a school like this deal with such a topic? The answer would depend on the world's politics. But there are a couple of options. Limited study? They'll talk about it, but not go over the practice or theories. Not enough to perform it yourself. Another is, you may require special permission to look into it. This can be difficult to get, and could take years to do so. Lastly, if the magical school is separate from the rest of the world, and could get away teaching it. Mind you, this could lead to plenty of drama for your setting, and could lead to mistrust of the magical school. But there are definitely a few schools of magic which would be taught. Alchemy seems pretty solid, but if you want to make and sell them, you may need a license and go through the Alchemist Guild exams. Yet adventurers would probably be interested in combat magic. Now, this gets complicated. It depends on a few factors. Remember how I said that many early schools cater to the social elite? Well, often they weren't foot soldiers. When they were sent to war, it was usually as an officer and commander. That could alter combat magic that they could be taught. But as schooling becomes more available, that changes everything. It can open up the widespread availability of wizard style of magic. If this is possible, then combat magic would be a definite class. If a wizard seeks to become an adventurer, it may be necessary to undertake such classes. Yet, the standing of adventurers could create issues here, if adventurers are viewed negatively as brutes and bandits. Well, with that, an adventurer class could be heavily shunned. The only ones who would take that are those in lower standing, the backup children of noble families, those who are only used to replace lost heirs or for political marriages. Of course, the opposite is true. In a society where adventurers are respected, then everything is different. Those trying to get into the adventurer class would become a massive competition. Mind you, we are going into what an adventurer does more than the school. So back on track. I don't know about teaching divination magic. It would depend on how it is viewed. Are prophecies real? Or just crazy people sprouting gibberish and making vague claims? And that is the key difference here. How reliable are they would determine the outcome of the school of divination. The school of charms might be an issue. Spells like Charm Person could actually be incredibly evil. A school of spells which alters their perception of you. Yeah, that falls into mind control. Those spells may be limited. Of course, counter charm spells would inevitably be created too in time. We really need to make a magical Geneva Convention, don't we? After that, most major schools of magic make pretty basic sense. Overall, much of a magical school makes sense, and it would heavily be influenced by the world building around it. Adam rubbed his throat. He had been speaking all day, yet he was sure that his classes had gone well. It was a different sort of work, to be sure. Heading to the hall, he overheard the bustle of the crowded school. He mused of how to work his next lessons. Oh, he had a few ideas. The idea of a magical school does make a lot of sense, and can lead to a fair bit of world building if you are clever. Thank you for watching, adventurers. Please return next time for the Displacer Beast. Until then, I'll see you on the roads.